So is it time?
Let me check the official time here. It says we got 2 minutes. So we
Okay,
look
well
at
then
this.
let me say something first then. If you go to Fort Moultrie, the video from the fire control and a position finding from 1942, they have snippets of the video that is in pristine, prime, clear condition. And I've asked at the National Park desk where that came from. And after going through 2 or 3 summer hires and things of that sort, they said that it was the video and all the displays were made at the Harpers Ferry Center. So I tried calling and emailing the Harpers Ferry Center, and I got, well, they're retired, we don't know, what are you talking about, things of that sort. So if there's anybody that's in Virginia area or something like that, and you want to pay a visit to the National Parks Harpers Center interpretive place, you may want to do some research to find out if they will let you know where that pristine copy came from. So
Stephen, so Gary Alexander didn't know where the details on that?
I don't have any idea. I'm just telling you now.
Okay.
My brother lives in Mount Pleasant, so we except for this year, obviously, we usually go there about every other year. So every time I go, I find a new ranger, and I ask the same question, and I'm given the same answers.
Well, Gary's our coordinator for the conference for this upcoming year, and he is with the Park Service down there, and he's been there for a while. So I would guess that if anybody down there knew, he would.
Could you contact them? Could someone on the East Coast please contact them?
So what exactly are you looking for? Is it a picture or a video?
The video that we just saw some part of in the last presentation on the 1942 training film of fire control and position finding. You know, the one that's on the internet and it's kind of blurred, and it's got what's that actor's name that narrates it? Something. The only copies I've seen are the blurred, where it looks like they took a 2-inch videotape and then went to 1.5 inch and things of that sort. So it's not very clear at all. Well, the snippets of the video they have at Fort Moultrie is in crystal clear condition. It's like new condition.
Okay.
I'll
Two
throw in.
I just sent you my email address privately there. If you can shoot me an email and remind me about that. I've got, there are some folks at Fort Moultrie that owe me some favors, and there's some folks at the Harpers Ferry Interpretive Center that owe me some favors. If I can find out what they titled it at Fort Moultrie.
Well, it's on.
I can maybe shag that down. Okay, who's got it? Who did it?
Okay. All I can tell you is that it's a video that's next to the mannequin that's manning an M1910A1 telescope, and it's a continuous loop. Runs for about 1.5 minutes, and it's just a continuous loop. So that's about all I can tell you. I can send you. I tried to take photographs through the 2 plates of glass.
No, if you can send me an email, just that description you gave me, that way, otherwise I'll forget how you described it. If you can send an email and describe it, I'll start asking questions.
I'll be seeing Gary Alexander on Monday. We're going to meet here at Port Fremont and just sort of hopefully look around and talk a little bit about, you know, the logistics of next April. If next April happens, and I can, if you want, I can bring that up, you know, to him.
Yes,
and
please.
he knows.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure he's sort of their indicate. As I understand, he's kind of the indicate period person at Fort Moultrie, and I will. I'll bring that up to him, and
okay, thank
I'll
you.
make a note to myself and to mention that to him.
Okay. So Thank you. So welcome to the update presentation from the last CDSG conference. I assumed when I put this together that you already know something about Endicott batteries. Most of you probably know more than I do. So I'm not going to go into a lot of those kind of details. I'm just going to do updates. I've asked for updates from other forts, and apparently the only ones that responded was myself. So I will tell you a little bit about Fort Ward. They redid the bakery building, and it's being used now as interpretive center at Fort Worden. The state parks put on a new roof on the Coast Artillery Museum, and there's been a lot of cleaning and stairs put in up on Capitol Hill, and it must be a popular place because they found a body in a tree. So, but he didn't have a Coast Artillery uniform on, so he probably wasn't that old. So this is for the 2020 CDSG conference would-be update from 2010 to 2020. Notice the 48-star flag up there was taken from a YMCA postcard from World War I. First of all, this is in memoriam and dedicated to Alfred Chiswell, who passed away last month. He was for the longest time while Greg Hagee was gone as the Mr. Coast Artillery for Puget Sound. His passing was not exactly a shock. He'd had heart problems for quite some time, but he is missed, and we wish his family well. This little plant here is on Whidbey Island, is the Coast Artillery's best friend because it lets us maintain what we have without cutting anything down or destroying what isn't already gone. And if you don't know what this is the golden paintbrush, an endangered species that for some reason, some odd reason, is found on the exterior and superior slope of the main gun of the 10-inch guns at Fort Casey. It's found at Eby's Prairie where the AMBT site was. It's at Battery Parker. It's at parts of Fort Eby. And because of that, we have to have a clear line. Since it grows in front, if the brush grows too tall, then it doesn't grow. And if it's too short, then the rabbits eat it. So we have to maintain a nice level and keep this gun line clear. Now this particular photograph, one reason why I find Whidbey Island unique in many ways, of course, you all find your own forts unique in their own ways, is that I'm standing up on a fire control hill for the guns. And if you look out and you just need a tiny bit of imagination, just darken the gun emplacements just a little bit. And this is the site that the soldiers saw in 1917. It's the exact same view with no changes, which we think is pretty remarkable. And you can even see the barracks area at Fort Worden, the parade ground, and the Point Wilson Lighthouse. This is one reason why we're trying to preserve this as much as we can, and using environmental groups in this kind, on this island, even though it's some people consider it an environmental extremist place. We don't. We find it to be our friends, and we work in conjunction with them to help them preserve their environmental conditions, and at the same time, so we can help and keep the coast defense. It's part of Eby's Landing. Fort Casey is part of Eby's Landing, which is a National Historic Reserve. It's part of the National Park System, but it's the only one that's a reserve that's run by a local board. And even though this isn't clear, it's because I took it off their website. It was real tiny. It's got National Park, State Parks, Island County, City of Coupeville, and this is their symbol. The Eby's Landing National Historic Reserve basically covers what the Coast Artillery covered at the turn of the 20th century and during World War II. So you've got Fort Eby that's towards the north. You've got Fort Casey, which is towards the south. You've also got where the land defense line was going to be in 1904 on Libby Road, all the way to Arnold Road, all the way to here, which is on a berm. Camp number 2, which had the cavalry and the hospital and the headquarters set up, was going to be here, and then all the trenches, the field artillery pieces, and all that was here. And then also at 1917 in Mitchell's Bluff, there was we have the plans that they were going to put 2 16-inch guns in separate emplacements here, which of course never materialized. And also at Eby's Landing, where the ANBT site was, where they had 2 90mm in fixed guns and 2 portables. Even the wells from Fort Casey, which is over here, this whole well site is still the Coupeville wells. That's the Coupeville water wells. These were the ones that they've been updated, but these were the original ones for Fort Casey. The only thing that would not be on here is a secondary water spring, which was Shield Springs, which would have been down in this area. So the Eby's Landing National Historic Reserve basically means that in the rural areas, you have to keep it pretty much the way it was about 150 years ago, except for the forts. And that really helps us maintain a kind of environment that used to be there in the old days. Now, they also have grant programs and workshops and things of that sort that involves the whole prairie. So the first one that we obtained some funds for was the Battery Worth 1915 plotting room. They basically were the Eby's Landing Historical Buildings Forever Fund, basically provides a fund that if you pay 50%, they'll pay 50%, and of your estimated cost, which includes labor. You can include labor cost. When it's completed, if you're within that total cost range, they will reimburse you for that other 50%. So it basically, in the end, if you do it right, it costs you nothing. The reason why we chose the plotting room, this is the same view that you saw in 2010 if you attended the conference. And this is the Battery Worth 1915 plotting room. It's only one of 2 Sewell construction buildings left in Puget Sound. At one time, there was over 80 of them. These are the only 2 left, and they were in pretty bad shape. So the first one, since the state parks has indicated they want to interpret Battery Worth in the 1915 and 1917 timeframe, this was our logical choice for us volunteers and a couple of the parks maintenance people to work on first. Oops. This is the condition that the building was in. This is interior to the building. These are actual 2x4s, real 2x4s, real 8x8s, true dimension wood. And as you can see, it was pretty much deteriorated, and you could actually see through it. The Sewell construction is basically double-sided stucco, except that the vapor barrier, I thought I had one, except that the vapor barrier is basically on the inside instead of the standard outside. You also notice that there were corners out. This photograph down here actually shows you the rotted wood that the whole building was sitting on. It was getting ready to collapse. And I don't know if you can see, I'm looking at everybody else's picture, but this is what it looked like on the inside. Now, part of the conditions is that you have to restore the exterior of a building, whether it be a barn, an outhouse, or this, into the historical perspective. So this is a close-up of the outside of the building with the Eby's Forever Front, and we worked on this for about 6 months, and you can tell this is a small piece of the sill board that we had to replace all of this with. Then, so state parks came in to assist us with the structural integrity of the building so that it wouldn't fall on us. So they built this this really exotic frame on the concrete floor just to keep the building up while we ripped everything else out underneath it. Kind of a little overboard, but they did really good work. And so then you can see, moving on, since we're limited on time, I'm going to go through a lot of this rather rapidly. And if you want more details, I've got hundreds of pictures. This was a repair on the outside. Then on the inside, we went out and special purchased some true dimension lumber so that we could maintain the historical integrity. And so this is that same section that you saw that it was all ripped out with a new 2x4s. We couldn't find 8x8 lumber, but we did find 6x6. So we used 6x6 and then some modern boards that were in between to fill in the gaps. Now we needed windows because we didn't have any windows. Well, at Fort Flagler, behind the powerhouse, in the brush and in between some trees, we found plates of old wire glass. Now, some of it was cracked and some of it was broken. So the orientation of the wires within the glass itself may be different per light, because as you know, these are called lights. They're not called windows. They're actually called lights within the window frame. And there was a carpenter that was very good at making frames. So these are all handmade frames. And we really hated to paint them because they were knotless wood. It was in beautiful condition, but originally they were painted black. So we did have to paint them, as you can see here. Also, surprisingly, all the original window weights were still in the sides of the windows. So these are all the original weights. You notice that the ones for the upper were longer than the ones for the bottom for some reason. But this is all new. Then we had to do a door. Now this is the door where I had a little bit of hurt, because this was my door, and again in conjunction with an environmental group called the Woodby Camano Land Trust. They purchased from Seattle Pacific University most of the northern part of Fort Casey, and there were two secondary buildings were included in that, and they were in really poor shape, a Sewell construction. And this front door is from the B double prime 8 and B double prime 9, which is battery Moore and battery Worth secondaries, and they really had to tear the buildings down. So they called me up, they let me know, and they said, you can go in and have anything that you want. You've got about a half a day to do it, but we don't know anything, because if you get hurt, we don't know anything. I said, oh, okay. And you know how us CDSG guys are: hurt, pain, no pain, it doesn't matter if we can get it for free. So I went in, I took both interior doors, which are now over at Fort Eby, and then I took this exterior door, and this is by my instrument benches in Fort Casey Powerhouse, but it was the only example of a door that we had. So I loaned my door to the door fabricators, and they made the reproduction doors. They actually made 3 of them, one for Worth, Moore, and the Searchlight Powerhouse. And unfortunately, when they did that, they destroyed the old door. And I cried a little bit, but I said, well, that's okay. At least we got 3 new doors out of it. So this was the result. A lot different than what it looked like originally. This is the one that eventually, which I'll show you later on, turned into the interpretive plotting room with the 1904 Whistler Hearns plotting board. So we finished that 1 year. That was successful. Eby's Landing liked our environmental stewardship, blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. So the next year, we applied for an Eby's Landing field school to restore the Battery Moore 1915 plotting room. The field school is basically sponsored and paid for by the National Park System. And what they do is they teach volunteers and amateurs construction techniques for restoring old buildings. And since this is the only Sewell or stucco type building that they had to work on, they chose this school for 2014. So this is what the Battery Moore 1915 plotting room looked like when we started, and it was in worse condition than the Battery Moore, than the Battery Worth. So these are some national parks people and some volunteers, and in a daily basis, they would have briefings, meetings. How are we going to fix this? How are we going to fix that? And then they went ahead and went at it. Now this is at Battery Worth. They were working on the windows. After a while, they had to work under a tarp. Unfortunately, in July, August, for some reason, it decided it was going to rain for almost a week. So we could not get the Searchlight powerhouse done, even though we have all the windows and the door for it. But we did have these volunteers work on more. And those being professional building restorers, we didn't need that elaborate setup to hold up the building. They just used some 6x6 and some floor jacks. That worked quite well. The roof was in pretty sad shape, so we had to replace some of the boards. Now, one of the discoveries working on the roof was that it actually had, when it was constructed, shiplap construction. So it's kind of hard to tell, but here there's about 6 places where there were brass tacks, flat brass tacks, every inch all the way down the length of that. And we pulled every single one of those out of there. And I said, well, then maybe we should put the shiplap construction back on there. And they said, well, they got a deviation from that and put on the World War II tar paper. And as you can tell, we had rotten places. Everything was coming apart again. Now this time, we got permission to lay down a concrete base, and then just put the wood and the bolts on top, and then we saved a lot of the two-dimension 2x4s, and I can't remember the name of it, but they put a ceiling compound on the bottom. And then they also wanted to make it a little bit earthquake proof, so they put some angle brackets. And as part of restoration, as part of a field school, you don't replace everything, you just replace what you need to replace. So this bottom of the windowsill, this was still fixable, and this part wasn't, so they just put in a new piece of wood. And as a result, this is a more modern picture of it, but this is the way that turned out, and that turned out well. Now, we were responsible for the gutters, so we used the what called out in the drawing. We used the 4-inch round gutters. The deviation that we got is the original gutters were made out of cedar, and that would have been very cost prohibitive and maintenance intensive. So we had the 4-inch diameter gutters, the 2-inch downspouts, but in order to get a junction between here and here, the smallest we could find was a 3-inch. So I built a tapered device right here to go from 3-inch to 2-inch, so we can maintain. This sign up here I will explain when we get to the next section. And this is the work group. A lot of the volunteers from the Evie's Landing group. Half of them are environmentalists, but that's okay. Like I keep saying, I'm so proud that we can work together when in so many other locations you can't. And there's yours truly. Now, one of my personal projects was the Battery Worth 1915 BC from 2001 to 2019. This is what it looked like in about 2001, and so this is what I had to work with, and it took the help and then some help from Greg Hagee to identify some of the element locations within here. And then you notice this is before they discovered that the golden paintbrush went all the way across the gun line. So there's still a little bit of brush, which we got rid of that real quick when they said, you know, we hated to do it, but we did it anyway. And you notice that the emplacement and gun had not been refurbed yet. And this is what we have as of last year. Oops. So we had as of last year. Interesting here is there's a gentleman which you'll see later when we're working on the Ford EV projects that is a master finish carpentry and things of that sort, and he was also a teacher, and getting a rough idea from Manual 8, some basic direction from Greg. We went ahead and manufactured a cutout box and a transfer box. What was interesting is if you look at Manual 8, it only really calls for a transfer box. But when I reinstalled the backing plate, it was quite obvious that there was more than one box on here. There would have had to have been two. So looking down into the plotting room, it was determined that they actually did have a cutout box. Well, sorry, they actually did have a cutout box and a transfer box. So I made one of each. The telephones are real. The conduit for the telephone wires was made by my brother. My brother made 80 feet of the medium size and 80 feet of the small size, so we could use original type gutters in here. So we've got the time interval bell. This is obviously for the lights. The scope is an A1. I had a 1910 scope, and Greg Hagee had a 1910 base. So I sold him my scope, and so this is why we have the the A1 version here. It was taken last year. If you also notice that we've got the time range board and the deflection board, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And when State Parks in 2017 wanted to do the big passive interpretive project with kiosks and all that, I asked if we could have one place on the fort, just one place within the battery, actually, where if a soldier from 1917 looked out, he could see the exact same thing. If we had a soldier now look out, he would see the exact same thing as he or she would see in 1917. And fortunately, working with the state and the contractor, if you're ever up here and we look out of the battery commander station, it's exactly the same thing. Well, except an 1896 carriage, if you really want to get into details. But this is the type of view that the soldier 100 years ago would have actually seen. The other interesting thing is that this backing board here it fits the size of an EE31 telephone. But looking at the inventory sheets, the Signal Corps inventory sheets of that time, they did not have any EE31s on the sheet. It said 0. EE71s, they had over 40. So for some reason, they built a backing board for a 31, but they installed the 71. And so that's what I did here. These are my rebuilt 71 and the composite. The only thing you don't see in this photograph is the rheostat for the lights would have been mounted on the post. We've got the loops, and I'm in the process of manufacturing all of the wood supports that would have gone around. The light fixture is from that era, and as I described in 2010, we found a lot of these light fixtures, but then they're made out of cast brass, but they're smaller than a 4-inch standard light fixture. And I had to work with a professor from the University of Indiana to figure out how to install a modern insulator into an old fixture. And we finally figured it out. And so I bought a bunch, and then I bought a whole bunch of carbide drills, and I carved them out one at a time. So this was just to give you an idea of what it was before and what it looks like now. Another project that state turned on, a lot of times the state doesn't have in their budget some money for actual work on guns and emplacements, but if you can justify it as a safety concern, then there's always something available, because that's cheaper than lawsuits. So this is what we had with the gun platforms. This is what kind of shape they were in. They've been built and rebuilt multiple times, rust coming apart, and plates that weren't even original because they're flat. There is no edge on it. So what they did is they manufactured observation platforms and gunner platforms. These were manufactured at a shipbuilding facility nearby in Anacortes, Washington, because they had the facilities to bend this edge all the way down. And this is after it came back from the plating shop. And here they are in the maintenance building at Fort Casey. The maintenance guys are rebuilding these using the original plans from the Ord Doc 1691. The only difference here is they couldn't find any hollow bulbs, so they just welded them on, and then they ground them down so that they almost look like they're shoved in instead of welded. And here you can get a good example of this. And then the I-beam that goes underneath. And then this is what they look like when they were completed, just before they were installed, one for gun 1 and one for gun 2. And they're pretty close to 1691. And there's battery more. There was some concrete repair, again, for safety reasons. So you can tell here where most of this column was replaced. On the splinter roof had huge gaps, and it was becoming weak. We had rebar hanging down from the bridge going over to Battery Moore. They didn't want to tear down the bridge, so they fixed that up. And then this is just an example of the excellent work that they did. They even had all the curvatures in it and things of that sort. They didn't get everything done, but the funds that were available for the hottest safety items, and they did an excellent job. Another item that you always have is you've always got
Hey, Steve, you disappeared.
hello? Hello?
Okay, you disappeared. You need to come back up. You need to do a screen share screen.
I wonder where I got kicked off. Huh.
No, you. Okay.
Okay, am I back?
Yep.
Yep. It was just a network flaky.
Okay, all right. So we needed 4 different sizes, and that was for here, that was for Fort, and also for Fort Worden. And so this is what you typically find. Now, a nice discovery is when we took an air chisel and thought, man, we're going to have to go down 1 or 2 foot of concrete. That's not what they did. Is when the pipes flared inward, they put a piece of plywood, and then they just put like about an inch and a half of concrete on top, which was really a relief. So what I had to do is find an old one, and then I just made a white out of it, and then I came down here and did the general dimensions. I started using a geometric tolerancing, and apparently, because of course I'm a retired Boeing engineer, and the first group of people took a look at that and they said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, okay." So I just went back to the old-fashioned way. If any of you are familiar with geometric tolerancing, so these are the 9-inch that you find at Battery Moore number 3, the Powerhouse in Moore, and at Battery Kingsbury. Then if you go back to Battery Worth, maybe it was a different contractor. I'm trying to research that, but the earlier ones are different. They're 7.5 inches by 4 inches deep, and it looks like a cup. Now, the disadvantage is that these don't quite fit the flares, the flare going down to the drain pipe. So some of these were like a 1/4 of an inch high, 3/8 of an inch high. And so a lot of times what they did is they reversed it and they put the cup on the bottom and then carved little niches in here in order to get the water drained out. Well, we didn't want to do that. So we had a Navy group come and volunteer, and they measured every single one, and then they would cut the flange accordingly to the depth so that it was just slightly lower so that we could drain the water off. Then we had 2 other types. Most of these were exterior ones, except for a Battery Velo interior. Most were 12 inches, but they had a couple in the gutters that for some reason, maybe it's because all they had at the time, it was 12.5 inches. So we had to make some at 12 inches and some at 12.5 inches. And then we had the exterior gutter connector drains. This is where several gutters would come together. And so we needed 4 different types, and they made a little bit more than we actually needed at the time. But since that time, and so these are the reproductions. Since that time, we've opened up every other room and every other battery except for one latrine at Fort Casey, and discovered that we needed about 9 or 10 more. Unfortunately, the company that made these went out of business because you could find them cheaper in that other country we won't mention right now. And so the state still has the patterns for these, but we can't have any more made right now. Now, and that helped during the water out really nice, and helped save some of the batteries, especially when they were used for other purposes like the Haunted Fort and Save the Whales projects and things of that sort. A discovery was an M1888 10-inch gun elevation band. And this is behind the ordnance building. The oil house is on the left-hand side. They were converting the oil house into a supply room and a laundromat just for the park hosts and the camp hosts. And they had to dig a water line and an electrical line, and they thought that they hit a conduit, or they hit something, because there was this big round object in the ground, and they couldn't figure out what it was. And inside of there, it was obviously used as a fire pit, because there was a lot of burnt iron and burnt steel in there, and melted aluminum. And what it ended up being is an elevation band for an 1888 a 10-inch gun. So since this photograph was taken, I've cleaned all this up, put some preservative on it, and it's sitting on top of a pallet right now. But apparently it's the only one that we know of that's in the country, and it probably came from Kingsbury Gun 1, because this gun came out early. And there's your 1888 band. We've also had we've engaged the high school over the years to do some shop class projects for us. And one of them, one of the earlier ones, was a pair of shot tongs. The only ones that we knew that I knew that existed was at Fort Stevens. We got a drawing that has a 12-inch shot tongs for a 12-inch shell. So what the Oak Harbor High School class did is they downsized it. They downsized the dimensions in order to fit a 10-inch shell, and this was their results. And it's an operational, and we've actually lifted a 617-pound shell and ran it by the rail system. Very, very impressive. Then we did 2 elevation wheels. And this was awesome. This was such an awesome job that they did, because the only drawing they had was from the Ordoc 1691, which doesn't give you all the dimensions. It gives you this rule, and it gives you a couple of dimensions. And they took that and they converted all of that into scale. And it took them 1.5 years, and they made 2 of these elevation wheels. Since gun number 2 is more complete than 1, we decided that gun number 2 was going to be the demonstration. These were put on so that kids could actually spin the wheels, or whoever, and they had some secret locking mechanisms on it, or semi-secret, or so we thought. Well, during this China virus stuff, they closed down the park completely, and within a couple of days, one of the wheels went missing. Somebody stole a wheel on the north side, and a report was written, but no investigation. What were they going to do anyway? We figured it must have been somebody that knew about the hidden locking mechanisms. Hidden locking mechanisms are basically you take some putty, you take some sealant, you put it around it, and you sand it down, you paint it, and then it just looks like a normal piece, which actually locks the wheel in. But this was such an outstanding job. We were really, really happy with this. And they also made a shot cart for us. This took a couple of years, a couple of shop classes. According to the drawings, they did not have gear cutting capabilities, so the gearing on the inside is missing. But everything else is a 2 scale and 2 drawing. This is one of our homemade shells. It's just made out of a cardboard tube with a wooden nose cone on it. And this is by gun number 2. But at the same time, you can make the adjustments in order to make it fit the barrel. And this is the real one. This is University of California, Sacramento ROTC training, 1923. And this just goes to show you how well that the students did, and how accurate they were, except for the gears on the inside. And we even put worth on the back of it. We're going to talk about lanterns in just a little bit, but it looks like they had just taken the lantern hooks out a short time previously. And here we go again. We pretended this was a cast iron shell. This fits into the carch niche, of course, which used to be the balanced platform hoist before they put in the Taylor Raymond, and just like in 1917, it fits perfect. Fits in there. Also, a high school made us a rammer and a sponge, and you can actually get about 4 or 5 people together, screw the rods on, and clean out the barrels, which in the summertime you got to do on a regular basis because you like to put rocks and sticks in them. Then the big capital project from State Parks was the interpretive project of 2017, which is the company in charge was Creo Industrial Arts, and I was fortunate enough to be the volunteer technical advisor on this, and this was so what they ended up with. So don't take too long. So what they ended up with is a bunch of kiosks. And the kiosks are low enough and angled enough that if you're up on a fire control hill, like I showed you earlier, it's very difficult to see these. And in keeping with the state preservation preservation manual, you're not allowed to put holes in concrete. Well, this was asphalted in World War II, but that's not considered concrete, so that was okay. But they can be lifted off. They're just bolted to the concrete. And then when you get over to where there's just a road, a hard road like this, and there's a gutter, then this is placed on the gutter, and there's an extra inch tall steel plate that's put on top. You'd need 2 or 3 big guys to push this over. Then and then they're going to kiosks in Worth number 2. So my job, since I'm also an electrician, my job was to install the lights in Worth number 2. So I did that. And then on the inside, this is Worth number 2. The state put some kiosks that had lights on them to describe hoists and things of that sort. And what was really nice is the state worked with Creo so that the design that would go on the outside on the parapet walls would be of such a design that it would be almost hidden if you really weren't looking at it, tall enough and also short enough so that a kid couldn't easily climb down here without wondering, well, am I going to make it to the bottom? And if he did, he'd have a hard time getting back on top. So they did an excellent design, hiding all this. Now, the requirement for no new holes in the contract didn't apply to natural cracks. So this is a natural crack. So you could bolt it to a natural crack, and they also had 50 pounds of sand in the bottom as well. Very nice job. Then they went and they painted on. This is a painted on time range board, and they constructed the roof. They did a T-square. The T-square we don't keep up here for obvious reasons. The first day it was up there, it was attached to the bottom, and of course it only took some kids about an hour to rip it down. So we keep this locked up except for when we have tours and demonstration purposes. And then I contributed and paid for it because I figured, well, if you've got the time range board, you need a deflection board. So I did all this, and this electrical system, except for a couple of parts, is original. They also, as part of it, they designed a simplified version of a gun telephone box. This is basically all aluminum sheet metal and plate with the mounts welded on the back. Did a real nice job. Now, they were kind of naive to think that they could just put a magnetic lock on the door and not have anything else happen. Well, of course, that didn't last more than a day, so that we just leave it open. Another part of the project is the plaques for the voice tube plaques for guns 1 and 2, and down in the ammunition spaces as well. We only had one original example to go by, and so they took that example, scraped it to see what the original paint would have been like, and then used the same type of lettering, which of course, as you know, is usually different from different forts, different locations. They used different shapes plaques and different type of lettering techniques. Then the big project was in the Battery Worth plotting room, and so what we did there is I cleaned off all the wood and used all this. And we cleaned off this to where it was originally, because originally they weren't painted. But Parks also wanted to show a transition from the old to the new, and that's why we stopped right here in order to show what it was look like now. And we'll get into some more detail here. Originally, according to the plans, the table would have been 90 degrees and would have been here. But what happens is when you let kids in here, then they climb around it, and then they climb on top, they climb on the tables. So by putting it in this direction, this is filled with sand. So you just move the deflection board over to here. Then they can't get back to fool with these, but we can still get back to use it as a interpretive. The only thing that is not a reproduction here on the wall here is my time interval clock. That's the one I have for guns. I also have one for mortars. So then again, looking through all the manuals, I looked through all the manuals that I have, and I found one. I found one that was the correction chart for a 10-inch gun, 16, 17-pound shell. So this is authentic. This is the type that would have been here. Also, I found one for the deflection board as well. So these are accurate to the 10-inch guns that were here itself. And then you've got the plotting board. I was hoping that when they built the 1904 Whistler Hearns plotting board, that it would be movable. We could do some active interpretation on it. But they decided they just wanted to make it passive. So this is all glued down. Everything was excellent. The only mistake that was made was they didn't have the same people that made the board that made the hardware. So they didn't get the scale right. This is supposed to be Point Wilson, and that should be like way down over here, and Marrowstone Island should be way over there. But otherwise, everything else is good. They got the numbers right, so that 180 degrees is north and 0 is south. A little concerned about that. And then this is looking the other way. Again, you've got the transition from the old into the new. And then once you look at this, you can turn right around and see the real board and the real range board. The only thing we don't have is the wind component indicator that's in the photograph. Also, they had a little bit of extra money. So working with Greg Hagee and David Hansen, they came up with some shells, some for the shot gallery, and then also for the shell room, showing the difference between the older shells and the newer ones. And these, I have the facsimile copper plates, and then these are the copper plates removed, so you can show where it was fused. You'll notice that they're on concrete blocks, and that just minimizes people trying to steal them. And then just this last year, they completed the project with an ADA ramp that goes down to the gun line. And I was really happy that they didn't put it straight from the parking lot to the battery parade. They made a circle around, they put these 3 introduction kiosks in. And then David Hansen came up with the saying that he wanted. And for those that can't read it, it says, if we were involved in a war, our first and greatest, one might say our only danger would be from attacks from upon our seacoast cities. William Carey, Singer, 1896, Assistant Secretary of War. I tried to get a compass rose where 180 was north and 0 was south, but they thought that was going to be too confusing, which it probably would have been. So they just have the north arrow using the old style. Then we had the 50th anniversary of the 10-inch gun installation on August 11th in 2018. And this is the original one in 1968 when David Kirshner was there, and Wilbur Sherman and Scoop Jackson in the ceremony of getting the guns installed. And this is the one from the state a website. So for 2018, we needed a regimental flag. So I asked Mark Bearhow if we could use the Coast Defense Study Group flag as the regimental flag for the ceremony. That's accepted. And now anytime you see something about the 50th anniversary of the guns installation on various websites, we got CDSG plastered all over it. And I think that's great. You'll notice that it's wet. So a quick story is the sun was out. It was kind of bright. We thought it was going to be great. And just as the ceremony started, there was a black cloud that came over and dumped rain for about a half hour. And at the half hour, we were getting ready to wrap up the ceremony and go have cake and all that stuff. And the sun came out again. Kind of ironic. Of course, there's a political message there too, because none of the Democrats showed up, but the Republicans did. Maybe that's why it rained. We don't know. And then we brought in David Kirshner from the East Coast because he's the only original guy left. Also, we decided to do
Steve, who was the band you had playing?
That was the same as 1968. It was it's a Washington State National Guard band. I can't remember the unit, but I can get it to you if you want.
That's just curious.
Yeah. So it was the same group, different people, of course. At the same time, we decided to at dusk to light up the lanterns and lights in the 10-inch guns just to see what it would be